Hello, everybody. I'd like to start by extending a warm welcome to everyone joining us for today's Bussola Institute webinar entitled The Future of Work, the Impact of Technology and Artificial Intelligence. This is the second in a series of related webinars on the theme of the future of work. We had enormous interest and very positive feedback from our audience arising from last December's webinar, which focused on the impact of the COVID pandemic and how it has accelerated the pace and progress of workplace transformation. In today's webinar, our distinguished panel of leading international experts will discuss the impact that artificial intelligence is having in the workplace and the continuing influence of technology on trends in the labor market, on the delivery of education, and in the wider economy and society. Fast-moving technological advances are creating seemingly endless possibilities, but also serious economic, social, and skills challenges for the way we will work, live, and learn in the future. Today's webinar will examine the challenges and the opportunities for governments, employers, employees, and educational institutions in adapting to the digital age. It will examine the challenges for organizations in equipping themselves with new capabilities to meet the pace and scale of accelerating technological disruption. We are absolutely delighted to have with us today four expert and widely experienced people to explore these issues. Before I introduce my first guest, I want to acknowledge that all of our distinguished panelists come to us today with wide experience and expertise. Each one of them has a very extensive curriculum vitae. So when I'm introducing people, I'm proposing only to touch on one or two aspects of their many achievements as I introduce them. And our first speaker, or our first panelist today, will be Dr. Yorg Schubert. And Yorg is a senior partner with McKinsey & Company based in Dubai. He's the global head of economic development, public sector practice, and at McKinsey's. And Yorg, as we've discussed in the past, you made a very interesting and a thought-provoking presentation to our last webinar on the future of work, during which you outlined McKinsey's research on the distinct elements of talent that would be needed to thrive in the future of work. Perhaps you could start our discussion today by describing how these skills relate to the technological disruption that we are talking about during our webinar today.
Thank you, John. So let me maybe try to link the discussion we had last time on future skills and the educational component that is required for the future to specifically now the discussion on technological disruption and the labor market. So last time we talked about what we called future skills, and these were cognitive, interpersonal, leadership skills, digital skills that we had identified as a base for everybody to continue learning and continue adjusting, as workplaces, skill requirements change over time. And that was for us, if you will, agnostic of any specific occupation, agnostic of specific technical skills that you'd require for your work. It was the basis upon which people continuously learn as they grow. And we had last time a discussion of what are these attributes of future skills? What are some of the mechanisms of how we can actually continuously train people? And this idea of lifelong learning, this idea of different academies came up and was discussed. And I think now we want to highlight one aspect of this transition, which is really the disruption at the workplace that is caused by technology. And I think there's an overlay now So it's not only about future skills, it's about how do different activities, how do job profiles change? How do we deal with that transition of changing skill requirements in the workplace, and what are some of the technological drivers actually that we need to be aware of? And so I'm looking forward to kind of highlighting that a little bit and diving a bit deeper into what are the technological trends and how does that affect ultimately the labor market, and what are some of the implications that we need to draw for the workforce in that context.
Thanks a million, Yorg, for that great introduction to this discussion. And indeed, I'd love to come back to you, and I will, in relation to the big trends, the big technological trends that drive that disruption. And we'll chat about that in a while. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Julianne Kirscher. Julianne is an associate partner at McKinsey & Company and a highly respected researcher. He's also an assistant professor of sustainable business and innovation studies at Utrecht University. Julianne, we know that the impact of technology and artificial intelligence will transform many jobs in the future. Could you please describe for us which skills, in your view, will be most in demand in the next couple of years?
Yeah, thank you so much, John. And first of all, my pleasure to be here. And since I'm a good consultant, I, of course, also brought a few PowerPoint slides to basically underscore my messages. I brought 5 messages on 7 slides that I'll quickly go through in around about, I'd say, 8 minutes. And message 1 really builds on what Yorg has just shared around technology, technological disruption. And the message we have here is that, first of all, artificial intelligence, AI, automation, digitization, these are hugely promising in our point of view from a consumer perspective, but also from a business perspective. These are some numbers we collected in different industries all around the world. Something like 30% lower costs, 30% better customer experience, and then also, of course, increased flexibility 24/7 once you go into AI, digitization, automation. So first message, really, there's a lot of promise in these technologies, although oftentimes, of course, in the public, they are perceived a lot more critical. Now, message number 2, though, is that specifically automation and artificial intelligence will fundamentally change how work is delivered and what work means in the everyday workplace. And we've done some additional research on this to kind of like break this down for occupations. And you see there's actually quite a bit of spread across the occupations. Until 2030, we think that something like 80 to 90% of the tasks of a travel agent or a stock clerk will be overtaken by some kind of automation AI, whereas there's also some other jobs that will change a lot less. The psychiatrists, for instance, we estimate only 10%, although even there's some AI bots that basically start doing psychiatry. So let's see if we're maybe mistaken. But overall, you can say that across all occupations we study, that 60% of these will have at least 30% of their tasks overtaken by automation, overtaken by AI by the year of 2030. So fundamental change is happening across all jobs. Now, and if the job changes, and that's message number 3, obviously also the industries as kind of like the aggregation level of these jobs, they will also fundamentally change because of artificial intelligence, automation. And here's an analysis where we broke this down to different sectors. And again, you see that there's some sectors not so much impacted: education, healthcare, management. But even in these, we think that something like a third of what's currently being done as tasks will be overtaken by 2030 by automation intelligence. And then you see some other sectors such as manufacturing, agriculture, hotel catering services, where really at least half of the activities will not be the same anymore in 2030. So big changes ahead. What we are doing with a lot of organizations right now is we're helping these organizations think through what are the skills they need in the future and what amount of that skills do they already have today. And I brought here an outside-in analysis we did for the automotive industry, where we specifically look into digital and AI relevant skills. We looked into companies such as Tesla, Nissan, Fiat, and Toyota. And what you see here on the next page, I didn't bring which company is kind of like which column here, but what you see here on the next page is the result of this. And the key message here, key message number 4, is really that within each industry, we see huge discrepancies regarding the prevalence of what we call future skills, right? So you see here on the very left, a company that many would say is at the forefront of the automotive industry these days, that has many of this data analytics skills, application development, application design skills in a very high prevalence, right? So many of the employees have these skills at a very high level of proficiency, whereas more on the right side, you see some of the automotive players that are typically portrayed also these days in the media as struggling. And you can also see it in the data if you start scraping data from LinkedIn, from Stepstone, from Sing to see like what do the employees actually have. You see that the prevalence is much less significant. Actually, there's differences in some skills such as backend development, data storage, UI, UX design of a factor 10, right? So the top players in the market have 10 times as many of these skills at a higher level of proficiency than the kind of like laggards in the market. So I think this is something that every organization, be it private or public sector, really needs to think about. What are the skills, what are the capabilities we need in the future? And then also have an honest conversation on where do we stand on these skills. Now to close, we have surveyed a lot of executives, 1,500 of them, asking them, where do they stand on any possible skill gaps that may be emerging in the organizations? And 87% of them said that they feel they're not adequately prepared to close any skill gaps that may be there in their organizations. And then interestingly enough, 75% also said that they think reskilling, so really upskilling, educating your own people, reskilling is at least half of the solution to close the skills gap, right? And this is really also meant as message number 5 of this presentation. You will not get out of the skill gap just by hiring a lot of folks, especially those in the digital realm, but also in the automation and the AI realm. They're just not there in the market, or they're so sought that it's extremely difficult to get them. So upskilling, reskilling, really bringing your kind of like your existing staff to the next level, in our point of view, is the core strategy to overcome any skill gaps. Obviously, there's also going to be some hiring, some external contracting, some redeploying, some releasing. But the big chunk of the solution is really embracing a collective learning journey for all of your organization in order to respond to the many changes that AI, automation, digitalization bring about. Yeah. And I hope I roughly stayed within the 8 minutes as I promised, John, but this was the last slide. And thank you so much for the opportunity to give this short mini keynote. Huh?
Julian, you did phenomenally well. You were even better than the 8 minutes. And this is something that the research that you've done there and that the McKinseys have done in this is invaluable to the wider discussion on AI and the workplace. And indeed, we'll come back with a few other more specific questions. But thanks a lot. And you condensed that so well. And you know, the points that you make are so relevant and so useful to us. So our next panelist is Dr. Susan Levy. And Susan is an associate professor in the School of Information and Communication at University College Dublin, with research interests concerning artificial intelligence, text mining, and digital humanities. And I know, Susan, that your postdoctoral research has explored the use of artificial intelligence and text mining for cultural analytics. And that's an area we'd love to do something about specifically sometime. But to begin with, in relation to what we're doing today, arising from your academic and research background in exploring the use of artificial intelligence, what impact do you think that artificial intelligence will have on the future of work?
Thanks, John. And I'd probably take a totally different tack than Julianne's really fascinating contribution there. And my focus may be a bit more on the societal effects. Yes. So I think that the artificial intelligence, it's undoubtedly set to have a transformative impact on the future of work. And the pace of change, like just in recent months, I think it's astonishing. Particularly in the areas of computer vision and language understanding and generation, those large-scale vision and language models. They really present very exciting and totally new possibilities, but they bring with them really serious, profound risks that we really need to think about carefully. So I'm not talking here about achieving a general artificial intelligence, you know, a kind of sentient being that could do a lot of generally intelligent things, but I'm talking about AI applied in particular quite narrow domains, but their effectiveness can really have a big effect on behavior in society in general and on the future of work in what regards to what people are going to do, the conditions of their work, their empowerment and pay, and even access to jobs. So, like when I think to make this really real, I guess I thought, well, when I normally think of the future of work and AI and technology, I think of like on the macro level in terms of economy and labor markets and how, you know, emerging technologies that might free up people to focus on more interesting and engaging aspects of their role, and it might increase efficiency and enable the development of new products that, like through things like personalization, are more useful to people and thus increases demand. And that's potentially really positive. However, what I've noticed is in recent months, like when I am, you know, chatting to young people in particular, maybe around the university or teenagers, and they're considering their future careers or what college course to do, I'm now very conscious of that the careers that they might choose may undergo dramatic change, and the pace of that change may really disrupt what they their planned career. And I was, in the past, I would have assumed, well, you just reskill, like we all have probably done many times throughout a career. But the pace of change, I think, is something that young people really have to consider, like what roles are at risk of automation and what roles might really be changed. And I think at this point, it's worth pointing out one difference, which is not always easy to identify, which is the difference between kind of when we talk about technology and automation and artificial intelligence. And it's just worth pointing out that difference, I think. To me, AI is just an aspiration, you know, an endeavor to simulate human intelligence in a machine. It's certainly a moving target, like what we deemed AI now, or we deem not AI now, would have been AI back in the 80s. Like we constantly change our definition of what we think is intelligent in a machine. But for me, the defining factor, I guess the line I draw is when machines are making decisions, especially decisions that we can't explain, and we don't always expect, and so devolving decisions, more and more decisions that humans now make to machines brings it with it risk. And a risk, I think, fundamentally is where it undermines human autonomy, and that, I think, is the point that we need to be aware of, I guess. So, and the risks in terms with regards to the future of work, if we break it down there's risks in terms of access, and this has been called out in terms of the EU proposed regulation. So increasingly, algorithms might be used to scan CVs or interview people, and monitor their gestures throughout interviews. And if algorithms are making that decisions like that, it introduces potential ethical problems in terms of bias and discrimination, and we need to be careful of that. there's risks in terms of a gap between jobs, a potential gap between jobs that are not in danger of being automated and those that do get automated. And there's AI brings with it a lot of new kind of jobs, such as labeling, and very crucial to AI, but it's not necessarily paid it's not in line with the value it creates, so is there going to be a bigger gap? Does AI algorithms take out a chunk of jobs that in the middle, really? It's just those kind of trends I'd be aware of watching for. So, and also there's a risk of replacement of jobs in industries that and this is literally in the last 6 months, I think, with the advances in computer vision, like the creative industries, like digital art, graphic design, those, like, we have algorithms that, you can put in text and they can generate graphics. So that may take out a layer of kind of junior graphic designers. So, but the problem is these algorithms only have learned from art that humans have made. So what if humans stop making those new pieces of art? The innovation stops, so we need to think beyond that immediate, well, this is cool, like what happens in the next generation when we have no digital artists that are human, because who do the machines learn from, There's risk in terms of conditions of work with respect to surveillance. So like we've talked before about, as a society, like say the Industrial Revolution and the introduction of what was termed Taylorism, where new management science, where people were measured and activities documented to find the most efficient way. And people really found this kind of dehumanizing, that level of surveillance. But with AI technologies, the level at which people can be surveilled and measured through biometric data and gathering information about what they're doing, how long it takes them to do everything, does that undermine human dignity, autonomy? What does that mean in terms of the worker and feeling that they are dignified in their workplace? So overall, there's a few kind of risks I would highlight, but there are obviously great benefits in terms of access, flexibility, and really new exciting jobs. But I guess as a society and government, we need to be mindful of who reaps the benefits and who's at risk, and make sure we manage that carefully.
That's great, Susan. Thank you very much. And this is what we're trying to do today, is to bring different perspectives and look at this whole question from different angles and different viewpoints. And thank you so much for that. And I'm moving on now to another viewpoint. And this is looking at somebody who has had huge experience and expertise in the whole technological field, and also, of course, in the field of education. And our next panelist is Dr. Abdullah T Falchamsey. And Abdullah T is a highly respected Emirati academic and author. And he's the current president and CEO of the higher colleges of technology across the United Arab Emirates. Previously, he was the managing director of the Institute of Applied Technology in UAE for 7 years. And during this time, he established some very interesting projects, including the Applied Technology High Schools, Fatima College for Health Sciences, and Abu Dhabi Polytech. Now, it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce Abdullah T, and a man that I've had enormous respect for from the 5 years that I spent in the UAE myself, and indeed met him on many occasions. So Abdullah T, you're extremely welcome. And Abdullah T will bring a different perspective again.
Thank you, John. And it's an honor to be among those esteemed panelists and to talk about a very contemporary issue on the AI, and of course, how we're going to apply it and be part or integrated within our education system. I will start by, back in 2013, I wrote a book called Welcome the iPad Generation. And in that book, I talked about the disruption that's happening because of the fourth industrial revolution, and it's how it's been impacting all the different business sectors, and how we are ready to change our education system to revamp it that it will meet the expectation of the workforce that is needed. And more importantly, we always look at the end product, but yet we always overlook our students, the recipient of our education system, how prepared they are. And it's very interesting when we talk about the Gen Z, they think different than us. Their brain is digitally wired. They are more into the technology. They are ahead of us, way ahead of us. And we as an educators, we always come late in putting our curriculum, our contents, simply because we monitor how the different business sectors, the competencies, the skills that is needed. So we prepare our curriculum accordingly. But unfortunately, the pace is going so fast, so that by the time our students goes through our curriculum and our contents, the skills become obsolete, and it is changing rapidly. We've seen it. It's a moving target, the skill sets, and it's very challenging. But then we realize it's not about specific type of skills. It's how would you educate our students to be professional learners, and how do we it's integrating the lifelong learning as part of our education system. Now, as an educator, I would say we were fortunate with the positive side of looking at the COVID-19 when it hit, that has given us a chance to accelerate many of those concepts, and give us an opportunity to implement many of those ideas we were kind of fear about in the past. We know how, because we are, as an educator, we are stubborn about education system, about the bureaucracy of it, about the curriculum, the contents, the learning outcome. But when COVID-19 hit, we said, no, wait a second. Now we have to go online. We have to implement new tools and ideas of technology in our education system. We need to trigger the interest of our students. How can we use different simulations? How can we make it's assisting us to deliver our education contents more appropriately? And I was very happy when I saw the slide presented earlier by Julian that education is the least impacted for the future type of jobs, but yet we still have the 30% that that AI will impact our role. But let's also be careful with or away from the shining new toy syndrome that's called AI, because AI has been there and it's impacting different business sectors, but impacting education will happen, but will never replace the human side, absolutely, in many different professions. There are certain professions, yes, that can be automated immediately, and we've seen the efficiency from the presentation we heard from Julian on delivering different products and services, but yet certain type of jobs that still need the face-to-face and the human contact, especially, education is one of them. So the transformation that have happened, we've seen it in the past 2-3 years, have also enriched our knowledge, enriched our the concepts of how we integrate technology as part of our education system. And more importantly, we've seen the excitement in our kids to learn differently than the traditional way of pushing them to learn. We've seen them how excited they are of going online, engaging with the students, becoming more interactive, using different tools and apps. And that have really made a positive impact in that sense. But yet, we have to also be careful not to go purely in the technology side, because again, the human of the face-to-face interaction, when it comes to hands-on, for example, workshops, discussion, presentation, even assessment that need to be done on campus. So it's a mix of both worlds. We need to bring best out of it. We need to integrate the AI into our education system, and we need to integrate the hands-on experience part of it. But the great advantage, I think, today, with the fourth industrial revolution that have brought to us, the big data, the AI tools that are available, that today we are able to customize our curriculum contents for every individual students. We all know our students, they have different talent, different capabilities, different pace. Now, if we can utilize this tool to assist us to design specific curriculum that meets students' expectation, interest, and talent. This is ideally what we need to push our education system forward. But yet we still need to have a framework that meets the overall learning outcomes when it comes to competencies and skills, because we want to make sure our degrees, our learning outcomes have, it meets the job requirements in the future as well. So it's a mix of both, I think, and it's an opportunity to utilize AI in more efficient way. And it is already happening, by the way, John. It is already happening in many universities, many schools, and that kind of integration. But yet still, I think we are at the very beginning, and education will always be behind different business sectors. We always behind. We lag behind few years until we see how that technology is impacting, and then how can we apply it in our education system. So it's a very broad topic. There's so many good initiatives happening, but I would like just to state in this session now that it's an advantage. It will assist us as a learner, but will never replace a teacher. It will help many countries, because we know in the coming future we will be short of maybe more than 25 million teachers all over the world. And this profession is very exhausting profession. It burns out because the hours that's demanding when it comes to teach. But yet, if we have the AI and the technology supporting our profession, it will help us to ease this kind of profession and bring more teachers excited about the way they deliver their instructions. And it will help us to provide a better education system. And I will stop here, John.
Thank you very much indeed, Abdullah T. And we've now had 4 different perspectives that will kind of intertwine and will help us to understand this. I already understand it far better than I did 30 minutes ago. And I'd like to go back to Yorg, who started the process this morning, and return to an area that you touched on, and that is, you know, the big technology trends that will drive disruption in the workforce. And would you like to elaborate a little more on that, Yorg, please?
Yeah, happy to, and I'll take again, first of all, a bit the business perspective, and then I'll try to link it back also to the social perspective that Susan had highlighted, and into education that Professor Abdullah had mentioned. So it's interesting, right? So why do we as consultants really deal with future of work, right? For us, this came more or less initially as an afterthought, because we were helping companies improve their processes. So we thought about digitization of processes. We looked at technology like robotics, for example, for manual activities. We thought about AI and analytics, personalization of services, and then realized, look, you know, we implemented all of this, and then almost as an afterthought, it was, what do we do then with the workforce, right? And how do we think about then the whole human component, right? How do we create the skills to man these new processes, and how do we manage the transition? And so you asked for the technology trends, and I think they're manifold. And when we talk about AI, it's a relatively narrow definition, right? There are some business models that are completely disrupted because of new technology. Think about online retail, for example. There are some business models that are just becoming more efficient through, for example, the digitization and automation of processes. There are new ways of human-machine collaboration. So the whole topic about robotics, right? And all of these, I think we would group together in these, you know, what we call the future of work. And so as consultants, we were working with businesses, and then, you know, realize that there's a much bigger theme and a much bigger topic, and this is why we started then doing the research and trying to really get our heads around what does that mean for, you know, for the human and for the workforce. Maybe just 2 more comments here. One aspect is, what is technologically possible, right? And so we have all of these technologies, but the second question then is, well, how quickly do companies or societies adopt these technologies and under which conditions? And I think this is a little bit also where Susan was going, right, to say, how do we manage then the risks and how do we think about the adoption of technologies? And partially that's driven by economics, partially that is driven by regulatory constraints and requirements, partially that is driven by just pricing mechanisms, right? So you would see that for example, in the West, the adoption curve of some of these technologies is much faster because certain skills are in high demand and labor cost is very, very high. You see other societies, more emerging markets, that are much slower in adopting, not because the technology is not available, but because labor is cheaper. And for businesses, actually the business case to deploy certain technologies is actually not as positive. So we need to think about the adoption curve. And then the next question then becomes, as we're thinking about thinking about the adoption of these technologies, how do we then mitigate our labor force? And what we also realized then was that companies that, and I think Julian was alluding to that embraced their labor force and basically provided continuity and simply said, look, the jobs will stay the same. Activities within that job may change, right? And what a machine operator used to do 10 years ago and what he will need to do 10 years from now will be different activities. We will still need a machine operator, right? But he will need to have very different skills. And the companies that embraced that and basically took their workforce and provided stability and tried to upskill them along this learning journey as they adopted new technologies, actually proved to be more resilient and more successful, rather than those that either waited and didn't do anything, right, or those that tried to fire and hire because a lot of these skills are not available. And that takes me to I think what Professor Abdullah T was mentioning in terms of the education system. I think what we're seeing now is, as you mentioned, this continuous education, but also a much larger collaboration of employers and educational institutions in form of corporate academies, in form of lifelong learning journeys, right? Where you need to get education institutions on board to complement and supplement, if you will, what is happening at the workplace, and find that mix between, teaching technical skills for the future, teaching these more generic future skills that we talked about, right? And providing them the apprenticeship and the practical application on the workplace. And I think that's maybe where the journey is going, where we see much more kind of collaboration and much more intertwined education interventions and technological advancement at the workplace.
Thank you very much, Yorg. And leading on from what Yorg has been saying, and what he's been saying in particular in relation to companies upskilling and so on, in your view, based on the research you've been doing and the work you've been doing, Julianne, what industries are likely to be most impacted by the so-called future of work?
Yeah, so I think first of all, no industry and also no job in the industry should believe that they're not impacted. Right? I think this is really something that will make a difference for everyone, from the psychiatrist to the clerk worker. And actually what we've seen in the past couple of years is that actually the automation, right, and the role that artificial intelligence plays has been largest in the so-called white collar job works as opposed to the blue collar ones, right? So there's actually much more change happening for those that always thought, I have a master's degree, I have a PhD, so I'm safe regarding the future of work and artificial intelligence. Law here could be possibly one of the best examples where automation basically starts replacing kind of like the entry-level tasks that lawyers used to do when they joined big law firms. That being said, there's of course also major differences from industry to industry. And I think the industries, and now take very much a German perspective, I'm based in Berlin, Germany, that will be hit hardest are what we call kind of like the legacy industries in Germany, right? So I think number one, this is certainly the the automotive industry, where much change has been happening, where Tesla, the United States, have taken a big leap forward, and where companies such as Volkswagen, Porsche, Audi, Skoda, Mercedes-Benz are really struggling to catch up, right? And we see that there's huge skilling shifts happening now, both in the automotive companies, but also their suppliers. And I think these companies have just begun to grapple, have just begun to understand the journey, the massive reskilling journey that's actually ahead of them, right? I think a second example that applies not just for Germany, but for all of Europe is, as a matter of fact, the energy industry, and to some extent, I would also include the chemicals industry in here, right? So the energy industry in Europe, now also accelerated by the invasion of Ukraine, is making this tremendous leap towards sustainability, and that requires fundamentally different skills in companies such as Shell, or also companies such as RWE than the ones we see today. I think actually not in the next 10 years, but I think in the next 12 to 24 to 36 months, massive skill changes will happen, must happen, in order for these industries to respond to that. Yeah, and let me maybe pause here, because I indeed think those two industries may be the ones, at least from a German perspective, that are most impacted by what's there to come. But again, I think no industry should think they'll be unimpacted. I think the moment you think that, probably it's the moment kind of like you kind of like enter a downward trajectory.
Thanks a lot, Julian. And Susan, coming to you now, I mean, some of the people who've spoken, in fact, I think your other three colleagues on the panel today have touched on, say, ethical issues that will arise in the context of artificial intelligence and the future technology in the workplace. In your view, Susan, what are some of the key ethical considerations pertaining to AI as it impacts on the world of work? The microphone, please. Yes, thank
you. I think the main ethical, it's a huge question and very difficult to summarize, but I suppose I'm focusing on AI because that's my area, and the technologies that we use now, like what do they need? They need computational power and data, and a task like an objective function, and often that objective function is keep us engaged. That's the one that's most widely used is on our phones, these AI algorithms that need to keep us engaged, and it can really, really influence human behavior and fundamentally create change society. And Abdullah T described that generation gap brilliantly, and often that's down to algorithms needing data to be able to create these personalized projects. So what's the biggest impact of that is changing behavior, but also changing concepts in society. So in the EU, when I think of the regulation, there's a strong focus on privacy. But if we get used to having so little privacy, because we give it up so much, the fundamental notions of privacy can change in a society. And a lot of the structures, like if we go even back to the UN or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the dignity and autonomy, privacy goes hand in hand with freedom. So things like when people get used to giving data, especially in the workplace, and the surveillance and the attempts to, there's been some not great attempts to count keyboard strokes and monitor attention through cameras, and then there's biometric surveillance that might fundamentally change levels of autonomy in society at a pace that we might not be in control of.
Yes. Thank you very much indeed. Arising from that and from Yorg's earlier comments, in relation to lifelong learning. Abdullah T, I know this is an area that you know well. And can you tell us a little bit maybe about the increasing role of technology and artificial intelligence and big data indeed in supporting more personalized learning and a culture of lifelong learning that will certainly be essential for the workplace of the future?
Absolutely. I think we need to rethink the education industry itself. Rethink it in a sense. One of the key challenges we faced before the pandemic, where we have to go on 100% online, get students to learn and try to pick up those kind of skills online, and then we realized there are gaps. Then we brought back students to a campus, and it has been a struggle to bring back those students, by the way, to campus, because it was a convenience also for our faculty and our students. If I wake up in the morning, 8 o'clock, open my laptop in pajama, I get into a class, fully engaged, fully interactive, so delighted. What makes me go to campus? What makes me go to school? If I can sit in a Starbucks in one of those nice malls, and I have my headset and following all the instructions with the teacher. And that's where, but then we realized there are gaps, yes, where we need students to get them for some of the activities hands-on. But what will attract students back onto a campus? And this is where we need to redesign our schools and our colleges. Do we need 70–80% of our campuses today made of classrooms, of bricks and mortars? Since we can deliver it with high efficiency online, and we can use all these artificial intelligence simulators to deliver to a certain extent, and it's available for our students. So this is make us rethink together that our education system and schools are not equipped for the future type of jobs and for the future skills. Our schools need to become more of an open lab space. Yorg brought a very important issue today. You cannot deliver instructions as an education system alone. You have to have a partner of industry, of an employer, helping you to cope with those new skills, because those new skills are not delivered only by our faculty and our teachers. We learn it from the industry, we try to adapt it, and where we can get our students engaged in it. So the engagement and the partnership with the industry is a must for the future good credential. And this is where thinking about partners on board as an employers, thinking about our students to become more excited to come to campus, that's quite of a challenge since we are dealing with the Gen Z. They are so happy, delighted, walking in a mall, having chat with their friends and their colleagues in a Starbucks, for example, or in a coffee shop, but they're not willing to do that on a campus. So we're thinking more of changing our schools, our campuses to become more of a mall-like campus. A mall-like campus, what I mean by that, let's bring social activities on board. Let's have cinemas, for example, fine dining, coffee shops, even retails in our campuses, in our schools. Let students come to campus, not because to attend a class, they're coming to campus to engage, to discuss a topic, an entrepreneurial project could be, a project that they want to share with their colleagues, having fun, just to chat with in a coffee shop. That kind of an environment we need to create in order to have talents that will meet the job market expectations and need to engage them in an industry. Having the industry on board with us to help us through different simulators, for example, creating a work environment that simulates within the campus to learn, to have all those kind of on-job training, being on campus, it will be very helpful. So I think remodeling our education system is a must. And traditionally, the way we deliver our instructions will put a great gap between the workforce that is needed in the workplace and as an outcome of our education system. Because we may teach them some of the basic fundamentals, the theory. They have to go, and when they join any job, they need another 2 years to learn and to be upskilled. So that puts a lot of burden on the industries that they cannot afford anymore that kind of a time to train or to upskill graduates. So the integration is becoming more critical. We think, and that's why if we put those kind of concepts together, we call it a hybrid education model. What I mean by hybrid, it's an online, on campus with social activities. And let's also keep an eye on the metaverse. That's becoming now more and more part of many of business, impacting many different business sectors, and how metaverse will be part of our simulation model in our universities and our campuses as well. And all this, it brings, again, an additional value, but without the face-to-face engagement and interaction and social gather to come up with all these innovative ideas, to discuss the different type of projects, to come up with solutions that will serve ultimately the industry, because today we don't need word expert to find a solution when we have an issue, for example, with a specific business sector. The creativity of our students, amazing, because they have access to all these different tools today. So creating that an open lab environment in our campuses definitely will impact and will put a better graduate for the future workforce.
Thank you very much. And I'll hop back for a minute to Susan, because I know you were smiling there, I think, thinking of University College Dublin being one of those campuses. You have to go back and talk now to Professor Deeks, to your president. Just a thought that occurred to me. Do you think that overall the impact of AI and technology on work will lead to a better future?
Oh, that's the question, ultimate question, isn't it? I think it can certainly lead to a better future for some, assuming that the carbon footprint of a lot of the AI technologies that are being developed is addressed. Assuming that issue is solved, these technologies can absolutely enhance people's lives in terms of access and flexibility, and there's great opportunity. Whether overall the benefit is greater is the question, I guess. So some may gain and too many, others might lose too much, and whether the benefits can be gained while also protecting those kind of inalienable rights of autonomy and freedom of people. Those are things to be, those trade-offs need to be carefully considered. But hopefully the future will be bright. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Julianne, just one other question, because we're running a little bit out of time. How can companies successfully tackle the skills challenges that people have been talking about here today and that are associated with the technological disruption?
Yeah. So I think step one really for companies, but not only for companies, but also private sector entities, is to really gain transparency on what are the skills I need in the future, but also what are the skills I have today and what are the resulting gaps, right? So I think this transparency is something that needs to come first. Otherwise, all subsequent actions will be blind, will be misguided. Step number two is, once we have this transparency, to really think through what's my set of initiatives, what are the most powerful levers, and what's the resulting strategy I can employ as an organization to close these gaps as fast as possible. As I shared in my presentation, we as McKinsey are very much convinced that at least 50% of the answer in any organization, in any industry, is always going to be reskilling, upskilling, right? It's not something that will just happen by hiring. And then last but not least, it's also important to bring the infrastructure in place to particularly allow for this upskilling, reskilling, right? So we've seen companies establish so-called skilling hubs, which are entities that kind of like function almost as a war room to do rapid upskilling, rapid reskilling. And we've seen some companies upskill, reskill more than 2/3 of their workforce via such skilling hubs in something like 1.5 years, right? So getting this infrastructure, this machinery almost in place to allow for, in a sense, industrial upskilling, reskilling, I think is also really key to respond to the skilling challenge.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're beginning to run out of time. I have stacks of questions that I would love to ask everybody, but there is one particular question that I'd like to ask each one of you, and I'll give you the reason why. I think that the reason that the Bussola Institute was established in the first instance was to encourage greater cooperation between the countries of the Gulf and the European Union. And therefore, the one question that I would like to ask everybody, and because of time constraints, you have about 1 minute or 1 minute and a few seconds to answer it. And that is, having identified yourselves before this webinar and from the discussion today, the impact that technology and AI are having on the workplace, on the labor market, and on learning and skills, what, in your view, are the areas in which the European Union and Gulf counterparts can work more effectively together in developing some specific actions or future research in this area? This is important because we will be feeding this back into the GCC and into EU. So I'll start with you, with Abdullah T.
Sure. I think today the skills that's needed by any business sectors is not limited to one region or one country. We've seen it now becoming more at the international level, set of standards that we try to bring our students, whether in Europe or in the Gulf region. But I think that makes the contents that we deliver today is very similar. And let me give you a very good practical example we have successfully made within the higher colleges during the past year, during the pandemic. We were able to deliver classes jointly with the students in Canada, in one of the institutions in Canada. And we had this class during the whole semester, where students attending from Dubai and students attending in Alberta, Canada, with both instructors. So they build that kind of relation, they build that kind of network, they deliver instructions together, it was evaluated together. I think now the technology is providing us with those kind of rich opportunities that we don't have to get our students to put them on a plane, spend 4 months there. I think that's a great opportunity. And since we share a lot of similarities when it comes to certain upskilling and especially related to technology, I think it's available and part of that we can make it also hybrid. By the way, I was suggesting the next phase that we will send our students for a couple of weeks, not for 4 months, toward the end of the semester to go and spend time with their colleagues in that region and to build that kind of social network and engagement so that they can carry on those kind of relation that they put for the after they graduate from university and even at the workplace.
Great. Thanks a lot, Yorg.
Yes. So maybe at the outset, just one comment. When I think about this topic in the discussion in Europe, AI and future of work is mainly regarded as a threat, and people are saying, well, how do we deal with this? If I think about the Gulf countries, it is a huge opportunity if you think about it, right? You have all of the GCC countries have a super ambitious growth agenda, right? They all want to diversify in industry, logistics, services, right? So there's a growth agenda. You have a super young population, and at the same time a high reliance on expatriates, right? So you have a much more fungible workforce, if you will, and a much more flexible workforce to react to these changing requirements in a high growth environment. And so you have really the potential to leapfrog. And what is the biggest issue in the GCC countries? It's low productivity, right? Mm-hmm. And if you think about the possibilities that technology gives us, you know, this idea to leapfrog in terms of productivity, to create really businesses that are globally competitive, right? It's a unique chance, I think, for a lot of the GCC countries to reach that level, I think, much faster because of that disruption that is in place. Mm-hmm. And so where do I see collaboration, right? It is most of the GCC countries have an agenda to invest very heavily in AI and into these technologies, right? And you see already a lot of entrepreneurial activity and potential partnerships on these technologies. The Gulf countries are much more flexible in creating regulatory sandboxes for some of these more experimental technologies, and are possibly a bit more adventurous and innovative and flexible compared to Western counterparts. So as it comes to adoption of technology and piloting these technologies, I think the Gulf countries are a great test bed in many instances. And then I think the third area of collaboration is really this topic of upskilling, where you could see partnerships between industry, academia, and educational institution, right, coming together and trying to develop that recipe that works at scale.
Thanks, Yorg. Thank you very much, Susan.
Thanks. That difference between the Gulf states and the EU is very interesting, and maybe there's it's very interesting. So the combination could produce a good balance, perhaps. For me, these technologies have the potential to really disrupt societal behavior and change workforces, and we do see the risks. I mean, there are great potential benefits. There are risks. It has gone wrong in places. So to ensure that innovation can happen, developing an ethical framework, and because of the global nature of these technologies, we can only do that together through cooperation and dialogue and a shared vision of what it means to produce these technologies within an ethical framework. So my main message will be cooperation and dialogue and new projects to carve out that vision for a kind of a good AI.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan. Julian.
I'll keep it very short since we're literally out of time. I actually think sustainability could also be an area for much collaboration around sustainability skills. Europe has learned so much on this topic. The Middle East must become a sustainability leader. So I see lots of room for synergies and collaboration here.
Thank you very much indeed, Julian. And thanks so much to the four of you for your phenomenal contributions to today's discussion. We will need to do this again because today we scratched the surface. There's more to be covered. And arising from this discussion today, it is clear that there are significant challenges and enormous opportunities for both the European Union and the Gulf countries in this emerging area of workplace transformation. And both regions come to the debate from different but highly complementary perspectives, in my view, and both have demonstrated a keen interest in working together. And if I may just for 1 minute mention the 26th EU GCC Joint Council and Ministerial meeting, which took place in Brussels in February, ministers from both regions committed to building stronger and more strategic and comprehensive partnerships in a range of areas, including the area of digital transition. And the joint communique that came from that meeting the joint communique that came recently from the EU Commission and the European External Action Service built on this comment very strongly. And that joint communication emphasized EU cooperation with the GCC countries on research and innovation that will create new markets and jobs and contribute to economic diversification. So at Bussola, we look forward very much to feeding today's insights into these important interregional discussions, and to inform then further development, further joint research into the future. Thank you all very, very much again. I look forward to seeing you all soon and to having some further discussion and maybe move forward in this very vital area for the future of the world, not just the future of the two regions, the future of the whole world. So thank you again.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.